On August 18, 1847, supper at the Whitmore Plantation began at the usual hour. Candles were lit. Chairs were drawn in. Glassware was placed with care. Nothing in the room suggested deviation. The clock in the parlor struck 7, and the sound traveled down the hall with the familiarity of a rule being followed. Clara stood at the threshold between the kitchen and the dining room, where servants were expected to pause until summoned. Her hands were folded at her waist. Her apron was clean. She did not move when the family entered, nor when they took their seats. She watched the placement of each plate as one might observe a process already completed. There were 12 at the table. The number had been mentioned earlier, as part of the reason for the extra duck, the additional bottle of wine, the second cake cooling in the kitchen. Judge Cornelius Whitmore sat at the head, upright, composed. It was his birthday. The detail had been repeated throughout the day, not ceremonially, but as expiation for the gathering, for the indulgence, for the noise. The meal had been prepared in stages. Sauces finished before noon. Vegetables kept warm, wine reduced and set aside. No one commented on the order of operations. It was Clara's responsibility to know when to begin each step. She had done so for years. The first toast was brief. The judge thanked his family. He thanked God. He thanked the land. The words followed a structure familiar enough that no one listened closely. Glasses were raised. Clara noticed the way the light caught in them. Bending briefly before settling at the far end of the table, the youngest child pushed her food away. She said something quietly to her mother. It was not repeated. The plate was nudged back into place. The child resumed eating. In the kitchen, the second cake waited. It had been iced earlier. The candles placed, but not lit. Clara had been precise with it. No decoration beyond what was expected. The surface was smooth. The clock struck again. 1:15. The sound seemed louder this time. Though nothing had changed, Clara adjusted her stance, shifting her weight without stepping forward. She remained where she was meant to be. Conversation at the table moved easily. Cotton prices, a neighbor's illness, plans for the coming weeks. The tone did not alter. No one remarked on the heat, though it pressed against the walls. The windows were open. Magnolia drifted in from outside. The first sign was not dramatic. One of the guests paused mid. Another reached for a napkin that was already in his hand. A glass tipped, then steadied. Someone laughed, assuming clumsiness. The child spoke again, this time louder. A chair scraped the floor as she stood. A hand reached for her shoulder. The movement did not complete. Clara remained in the doorway. She did not step back when voices rose. She did not step forward when a chair fell. Her expression did not change. She watched as if confirming something already measured. A name was called. Then another. The bell on the sideboard was struck. Once, then again. The sound was clear. It carried down the hall. In the kitchen, no one answered it. By the time the judge attempted to stand, his movement was slow and uncertain, as though the floor had shifted. He did not reach the edge of the table. Someone said the food. Someone else said the wine. The words overlapped and then broke apart. All eyes turned toward the doorway. Clara was no longer there. Later accounts would disagree on the exact moment she left. Some would say she was seen heading toward the river. Others would insist she had already gone by the time the bell rang. No one could prove either version. There were no footprints that could not be explained. No witness who would speak plainly. By 8 o'clock, the noise from the dining room had spread to the quarters. Doors opened, then closed. Some listened. Some did not. No one ran. At dawn, the house would be silent. That outcome was not yet known. What was known in that moment was that supper had been served as intended, and something in the order of things had failed without announcing itself. The clock continued to mark the time. By morning, the house was sealed, not by force, but by habit. Windows were shut, curtains drawn. The front gate remained closed longer than usual. No announcement was made, yet everyone on the property understood that movement would be noticed. The overseer arrived before sunrise. He did not enter the dining room at first. He stood in the hallway, hat in hand, waiting for instruction that did not come. When he was finally summoned, he was told only to keep the men in the fields until further notice and to send a rider to town. No explanation accompanied the order. In the kitchen, the remaining staff were made to sit. Chairs were brought in from other rooms. No one was asked what they had seen. No one was told what had happened. They waited while footsteps passed outside the door, while the house breathed around them in a way that felt unfamiliar. Clara's absence was noted without emphasis. Her name was not spoken aloud. The cook accounted for the meals. The pantry was checked. The wine cellar was locked. A ledger was retrieved and placed on the counter, open to a page where purchases were recorded in careful ink. Flour, sugar, spices. Nothing unusual appeared there. When the physician arrived, he came alone. He was known to the family. He had been present at births, at fevers, at quiet endings. He examined the guests one by one, then the judge, then the child. His notes were brief. He did not speculate in front of others. He asked what had been served. The answers matched the ledger. By noon, the men in the fields had been dismissed. They were told the judge was unwell. The word unwell carried weight. It explained the silence. It justified the delay in orders. It required no further detail. A wagon was sent to town with instructions to fetch a magistrate. Though no urgency was attached, the rider was told to stop first at the apothecary, then the post office. Letters were sent before questions were asked. In the quarters, talk spread unevenly. Some said the judge had been struck down by God. Others said the wine had spoiled. A few mentioned Clara, quietly, as an absence rather than a suspect. She had worked in the house. She had been careful. She had been quiet. These facts were stated without conclusion. The overseer walked the perimeter in the afternoon. He checked the river path. He found nothing that required reporting. The water moved as it always had. The reeds bent and straightened. He marked. The inspection complete. Inside the house, the family gathered in the parlor. Chairs were arranged close together. No one touched the piano. The clock was stopped. Someone suggested it was making the room feel smaller. The suggestion was accepted. When the magistrate arrived near dusk, he was offered food and declined. He listened. He asked about the guests. He asked about Clara. The answers were careful. She had been present. She had done her work. She was not present now. He wrote this down without expression. There was no search ordered that night. The magistrate said it would wait until morning. The roads were dark, the river unpredictable. He spoke as if describing whether the decision was recorded. A guard was posted at the kitchen door, though no one attempted to enter. The pantry remained locked. The ledger stayed open where it was, its pages curling slightly at the edges. In the early hours, one of the guests died. The physician noted the time. He did not revise his earlier notes. Another followed before dawn. The pattern did not prompt a new response. The house had already adjusted itself to the event, absorbing it into routine. By the second morning, the word incident began to circulate. It appeared in conversation between men who had not been present. It appeared in a letter drafted by the magistrate, its tone measured, its details minimal. It was a word that allowed distance. Clara's name appeared once in writing, as part of a list. Missing. The term was used as it would be for a misplaced tool, or a horse that had not returned to the stable. No urgency was attached to it. No reward was offered. The kitchen was cleaned, surfaces scrubbed, pots boiled. The second cake was discarded without comment. Candles were returned to storage. The dining room was closed, then reopened, then used again. Chairs were repaired, a glass replaced. When the judge's body was prepared, it was done according to custom. The physician supervised, the family observed. No mention was made of supper. The cause was left unspecified. It would not be written down. By the end of the week, the plantation resumed its rhythm. Orders were given. Fields were worked. Accounts were balanced. The overseer noted the loss of labor in the household and requested a replacement. The request was approved. Clara's absence settled into the background, unremarked but present. Her tasks were redistributed. Her name ceased to be useful. In the records, she remained where she had always been, fixed in ink, unchanged by the quiet shift that had removed her from the world that depended on her. What had happened at supper was not denied. It was simply placed where it could do the least amount of damage inside routine, inside paperwork, inside the assumption that systems endured regardless of who passed through them. By the time the magistrate departed, the house had learned how to be still again. The disturbance had been contained not by resolution, but by the careful narrowing of what could be said. The first contradiction appeared in the ledger, though no one announced it as such. It was a small discrepancy, the kind that might normally be corrected without comment. A purchase listed twice, a date misaligned with a margin. Flour accounted for that had not been used, or had been used earlier than recorded. The overseer noticed it while reconciling the household accounts. He marked the line with his thumb and went back through the previous week. The figures did not resolve themselves. He closed the book and reopened it, as if the act alone might reorder the entries. It did not. Later that afternoon, the physician returned without being summoned. He asked to see the kitchen. The request was granted after a pause. He walked slowly, touching nothing. He asked where Clara had stood during supper service. No one answered directly. The space was indicated instead. He examined the shelves, the spice jars, the mortar. He did not open the locked pantry. He did not request the key. His questions remained narrow, but they accumulated. That evening, one of the guests who had survived was moved to a room away from the main house. The decision was practical, explained as precaution. The guest spoke little. When he did, it was about the taste of the wine. He said it had been bitter, then corrected himself. He said it had been different. He could not say how. In town, rumors shifted shape. At first, the talk had followed familiar lines: spoiled food, summer illness, an unlucky gathering. Then a new version began to circulate, introduced cautiously, attributed to no one in particular. It suggested intention without naming an actor. It suggested that something had been added rather than something having gone wrong. The magistrate received a letter from the physician. It was written carefully, with no claims beyond observation. Symptoms aligned, timing consistent. The language stopped short of accusation. It did not mention Clara by name. It did not need to. The magistrate reread his own notes from the night of the supper. He noticed what he had not written down. No cause. No follow-up. Ordered. He had assumed the structure would hold without instruction. That assumption now felt exposed. A search was discussed. The river path reconsidered. The woods beyond the quarters mentioned. Each suggestion met resistance. Not openly, but through delay. Men were busy. Weather uncertain. There was no proof of flight, only absence. In the quarters, a different contradiction emerged. Clara had not taken her spare shoes. Her shawl remained folded where it had always been. These details were noticed by those who shared space with her. They were shared quietly, as information rather than argument. One woman said Clara had spoken of the ledger weeks earlier. She had asked how long names stayed written after bodies were gone. The question had seemed abstract at the time. It did not seem so now. The overseer was instructed to question the kitchen staff. He did so one by one, in the same room, at the same table. His tone was even. He asked about routines, measurements, timing. No one contradicted another. No one added more than was asked. When he reached the question of Clara, the answers diverged. She had been calm. She had been tired. She had been distracted. Each statement was plausible. Together, they did not align. The magistrate returned to the house on the third day. He requested the ledger again. He noticed the duplicate entry. He noticed that the ink on one line was darker, newer. Someone had corrected something after the fact. The correction was neat. Too neat. He asked who had access to the book. The answer was procedural. Several people. No one in particular. Responsibility dispersed itself. By then, the word poison had appeared, though only in private. It was spoken once, then avoided. The magistrate did not write it down. To do so would require a sequence of actions he was not prepared to initiate. Authority hesitated. The physician would not accuse without instruction. The overseer would not pursue without orders. The magistrate would not order without certainty. Each position relied on the others to move first. Clara's absence grew more specific. It was no longer just that she was gone, but that her going made sense of what had happened. The recognition did not simplify matters. It complicated them. If she had acted, then the house was vulnerable. The kitchen was no longer neutral. Routine no longer guaranteed safety. These implications were considered briefly, then set aside. A notice was drafted and never posted. It described a missing servant. It omitted circumstances. It was folded and placed in a drawer. The drawer was closed. By the end of the week, the surviving guest was moved again, this time out of the county. The reason given was recovery. The timing was not discussed. In the ledger, the duplicate entry remained. No one corrected it. It became part of the record, a quiet marker of something unresolved. What had begun as an unexplained illness now carried a shape that could be traced, but not named. The disturbance had acquired a logic. The system, confronted with it, did not collapse. It paused. Moral clarity increased in the spaces between decisions. Legal clarity did not follow. Each day that passed without action made the next action more difficult. By the time the magistrate left for the second time, he carried his papers with him. He did not say when he would return. The house resumed its careful quiet, but the silence had changed. It no longer rested on ignorance, but on a shared understanding that recognition had arrived too late to be useful. The fracture did not widen further. It did not need to. It had already altered the structure in ways that would not be recorded, only lived with, until they were no longer spoken of at all. Containment began without announcement. It did not require a meeting or a written order. It proceeded through small decisions that appeared unrelated, each one defensible on its own. The magistrate's report was delayed. When it arrived, it contained no conclusions. The language emphasized uncertainty, listed symptoms, referenced weather conditions, and noted the absence of conclusive evidence. Clara's name appeared only once, in a paragraph describing household staff, followed by the phrase, whereabouts unknown. The document closed with a recommendation for no further action until additional information presented itself. No additional information did. The physician returned to his practice. When asked later about the incident, he described it as unfortunate. He said the summer had been difficult for many. He did not contradict rumors. He did not confirm them. His notes were filed and not revisited. The overseer received instructions to fill the vacant position in the kitchen. A woman was purchased from a neighboring county. She arrived with no knowledge of the house's recent history. She was given Clara's apron, washed and folded. The name was not mentioned. The ledger was closed and replaced. A new book was started at the beginning of the next month. The duplicate entry did not carry over. In the new pages, the household appeared orderly. Expenses aligned. Nothing missing. In town, the story stabilized. The deaths were attributed to illness. Some said fever. Some said tainted wine imported too late in the season. The explanation varied, but the effect was consistent. The event no longer demanded attention. The surviving guest did not return. When asked, the family said his health required distance. His name ceased to appear in correspondence. He did not contradict the prevailing version. Silence traveled more easily than correction. A small search was conducted, enough to satisfy the appearance of procedure. Men walked the riverbank again. A pair of shoes was found near the water weeks later. They were not identified conclusively. The finding was recorded, then forgotten. Clara was not named in the notice posted at the courthouse. It referred only to a servant, height approximate, age unknown. The paper remained up for a few days before curling at the edges. It was taken down when the weather turned. The judge's estate entered probate. Documents were reviewed. Property reassigned. The process required precision, not memory. Clara's name appeared nowhere in the legal transfer. She had not been property of sufficient value to complicate the division. Her absence simplified matters. In the house, rooms were rearranged. The dining room table was shortened. Fewer chairs were needed. The clock was repaired and set running again. Its sound returned to being unremarkable. The family they avoided speaking of the supper. They avoided the date. Birthdays were celebrated elsewhere. Guests were fewer. Meals became quieter, though no one remarked on the change. When the magistrate passed through the county months later, he did not stop at the plantation. His earlier hesitation had resolved itself into a decision not to reopen what could not be proven. His role had been fulfilled by restraint. Records closed. Witnesses each person involved found a way to explain their inaction as prudence. The explanations differed, but they aligned. Clara's quarters were reassigned. Her few remaining belongings were distributed or discarded. A shawl was used by someone else. A spoon returned to the kitchen drawer. Objects absorbed into new routines lose their history quickly. In the broader region, nothing shifted. Fields were planted, crops harvested. Markets adjusted. The incident did not alter prices or policy. It was too contained for that. What remained was a version of events that could be repeated without discomfort. It had no villain, no motive, no disruption large enough to threaten the structure that depended on its absence. By winter, the story had settled into a shape that no longer changed. Children who heard it later would hear only that a household once fell ill after supper. They would not hear names. Containment did not erase what happened. It repositioned it. The disturbance was moved from the present into the past, from the specific into the vague. It became something that had occurred rather than something that required response. The system preserved itself not through force, but through narrowing. Narrowing of language. Narrowing of memory. Narrowing of responsibility. By the time the year ended, Clara existed only as a gap no one pointed to. Her disappearance had been absorbed into procedure, her potential actions rendered irrelevant by the lack of official recognition. The public narrative held. It did so quietly, and because it held, there was no need to test it further. Years passed without marking themselves. The plantation changed hands once. Then again, fields were divided, then consolidated. The house remained, though parts of it were altered. Walls moved, doors sealed, windows replaced. Each change addressed a practical need. None acknowledged what had occurred there before. In town, records accumulated. Births, deaths, transfers. The magistrate's earlier report was filed under routine matters. It was referenced once, years later, during a review of unresolved cases. The clerk noted its incompleteness, then moved on. There were others to consider. The physician died quietly. His papers were sorted by a nephew who recognized the handwriting but not the circumstances. Notes without conclusions were set aside. The page concerning the Whitmore supper was thin. It contained no decisive language. It was kept, then forgotten. The overseer left the region. His replacement did not ask about prior arrangements. He inherited procedures, not memories. When he noticed an irregularity in the older ledgers, he assumed a bookkeeping error and corrected it. The correction erased the last visible trace of discrepancy. In the quarters, names shifted with each new arrival. Stories thinned as they were repeated. Clara's name survived longest among those who had known her directly. It was spoken less often as those people aged, then not at all. When it disappeared, it did so without notice. A traveler once mentioned a woman seen years earlier along the river road, working briefly in another county. The description was uncertain. The age did not align. The account was received politely and set aside. It did not attach itself to anything concrete. The shoes found near the water were eventually repurposed. Leather does not hold meaning once it is needed elsewhere. The finding had already lost its context. Without context, it required no explanation. Children who grew up in the house learned its layout without learning its history. They knew which rooms were cool in summer, which boards creaked, which windows stuck. They did not know why one dining chair was different from the others, or why meals were served earlier than before. On the anniversary of the supper, nothing occurred. No ritual marked the date. It passed like any other. Time did not return to the moment. It moved past it. In the courthouse, the notice describing a missing servant was discovered during a reorganization. The paper was brittle. The ink had faded. The description was incomplete. The clerk could not determine whether it had ever led to anything. It was placed in a box, labeled miscellaneous. Later, when the box was reviewed, the notice was removed. It lacked identifying detail. It duplicated. No active case. It was deemed unnecessary to retain. The decision was procedural. A local historian compiling accounts of the region noted the Whitmore deaths. In a footnote, he cited illness. He cited contemporary belief. He found no contradictory documentation. The footnote remained unchanged through multiple editions. Occasionally, someone would mention that the house felt quiet in a particular way. The comment carried no weight. Houses often feel quiet. Explanations were not required. The river continued to run its course. It carried debris. It carried reflection. It did not return what it had taken, if it had taken anything at all. Its presence outlasted the questions once asked of it. In the absence of acknowledgement, the event receded. It did not vanish, but it ceased to influence decisions. What is not named cannot be addressed. What is not addressed does not alter structures built to endure. Clara's life, whatever shape it had taken beyond the plantation, did not enter the record. If she survived, she did so outside the view of those who would have named her only in relation to what had happened. If she did not, the fact produced no document. Time worked without intention. It distributed consequences unevenly. Some lived with an understanding they did not articulate. Others inherited only the silence that understanding had made possible. By the time the plantation ceased operation entirely, the supper existed only as an absentine explanation. Why certain customs persisted, why certain questions were not asked. These patterns outlasted their origin. In the archive, the box marked miscellaneous was moved to storage. Years later, during a flood, its contents were damaged. Paper, soft, ink, bled. The notice, already fragile, dissolved beyond legibility. No effort was made to restore it. What remained was not a story, but a gap where one might have been. The gap did not call attention to itself. It blended into the larger silence that history allows when systems close ranks around what they cannot absorb. The house eventually stood empty. Wind moved through it. Dust settled. The dining room table was gone. The clock had stopped again. No one wounded. Nothing announced the end. There was no final accounting. The aftermath did not resolve. It simply extended, thinning with each passing year until recognition, if it ever arrived, would have no object to attach itself to. And so the event concluded, as it had been managed all along, not with understanding, but with neglect. Archived and unremarked, its edges worn smooth by time, until even the question of it disappeared.